And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Chokeslam Wrestling Debate. I am JTH, the Rob Conway of Wrestling Debate hosts. And for anybody that does know what that reference is, I pity you. So without further ado, we got two brand new debuting players here today. We have Ryan and we have Jacob. We got some great questions that are looking forward to, such as what's the worst pay-per-view from WWE in 2019? Okay, maybe that's not a great question, but it should spark some great debate. Also, what is the best WrestleMania main event of all time? So basically, for those of you that are new here, this is basically how it's going to work. We're going to have an opening of 90 seconds for each of our players. Then we're going to have a 5-minute debate period. Once the 5-minute debate is over, both of our players will have a 60-second closing argument. Basically, after everything is done, after the debate for each question is done, we will have our three judges, including myself, determine who gave the best argument for each question. Majority vote gets the point. And basically, it's a first to three. It's that simple. If after the first 4 main round questions, we have a 2-2 tie, we will have a speed round question to determine who will be the victor. Also, for our newer players that might not be aware, at any point, each of you has one 1-minute extension that you can use for any of the questions at any point during the match. If at any point you wish to use it, all you have to do before your opening and or closing argument, just say that you wish to use your extension, and you will get an additional minute for your opening or closing argument, depending on when you wish to use it. But you only get one, so use your extension wisely. So without further ado, I believe both of our players are ready, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So I kind of hinted at the first question. So WWE had some great pay-per-views in 2019, and they had some not-so-good ones. And we want to find out what was the worst WWE pay-per-view of 2019. Jacob, we're going to start with you. So, Jacob, whenever you're ready, what was your pick for the worst pay-per-view from WWE of 2019?
Well, there were a lot to choose from, but I went with one that we could have done without for the year. Like, it accomplished nothing. And I'm talking about Super Showdown from Saudi Arabia. This featured a 26-minute Triple H versus Randy Orton match, which nobody needed in 2019. This featured a Undertaker versus Goldberg match, which nobody needed in 2019. This featured a 51-man Battle Royal match, which you couldn't even see the ring when they were all in there. It was ridiculous. And it featured a waste of a demon appearance from Finn Balor. It featured a Lars Sullivan handicap match, which, let's be honest, accomplishes nothing, especially now. And it featured a few more matches, but I'll get into those later. Super Showdown, worst of 2019.
All right, so Jacob's gone with a Super Showdown. Now let's go to his opponent, Ryan. Ryan, what have you chosen for the worst WWE pay-per-view of 2019?
Well, piggybacking on what Jacob said, yes, there was a mixed bag when it came to what was good and what was bad in the WWE. The one I picked, I feel, is probably the most insulting to the audience and the fan base. The least well-promoted, the least packaged, and overall, it was just one of those shows that's like, when you look back upon it, the feeling you get is just anger and disappointment. And that would be 2019's version of Hell in a Cell. And mind you, there's much more to talk about for this match, more so than the Bray Wyatt-Seth Rollins match, which, of course, anyone can tell you, if you don't stick the landing, it's all for naught. But this had tumbles either way. And ultimately, in the canon of WWE for that year, it was a big, big black point.
All right, two very worthy choices for this question. So without further ado, the 5-minute debate period will begin when the first person begins speaking.
Well, I do want to go ahead and say, first and foremost, Super Showdown, can we really call it a pay-per-view to some extent? It's really more of just a glorified house show for the Saudi Arabia fans. It was something that was primarily made for them, And as such, yeah, none of the matches are going to technically make sense, just like any house show technically doesn't even make sense. And it's more something that we're just going ahead
How many
and
house
showing
shows
these
does
fans.
Undertaker do, though?
Hmm?
You gonna bring Goldberg out for a house show? No, it's not a
Yeah, you're
house
going to
show.
bring him out for a glorified house
No.
show for an audience that normally has
No.
never gotten to see these performers at all and been their entire lifetime of being fans.
When Vince puts the set and everything on par with WrestleMania, no, it's not a house show. And
he's putting it on par
let's go
with
to
the
hell.
promotional of it just because of the money he's getting from it. He's making it a big deal for people to tune in because it's something that they'd only be able to tune into because they can't actually buy tickets to go and see it. And as far as the matches are concerned, I mean, if I go down the list here, the Usos Revival, great tag match. Demon Balor and Andrade, a great technical match. Go on.
That match felt like half a match. Like they didn't even get enough time to really showcase what they could do. So that match was very disappointing.
Only because it wasn't long enough. I mean, for the amount of time that they had, they certainly utilized it. I'd say the only one you could say would really went on for too long was probably Shane O'Mac and Roman. And that's one match out of the cavalcade of superstars that they had going on there. And quite frankly, Shane O'Mac just winning, it speaks volumes of the heat he was getting at the time.
So you're saying Randy Orton and Triple H deserve 26 minutes, which is longer than both championship matches combined. Which, let's be honest, nobody wants to see Corbin in a long match, so that's one.
In comparison to the match that I got with him in Hell in a Cell, the Corbin versus Seth match was a much better showing for Corbin. All right, I didn't need Corbin versus Shorty G. All right, at least you got the better Corbin match.
I don't know about that. I think people are overrating Rollins this year. He's good.
No.
But I don't think he's the guy to take Corbin to a good match.
Let's be clear that he had such a bad year, 2019, and this
I will not disagree with
him
that.
and Saudi Arabia was a drop in the bucket compared to the disappointment that we got at Hell in a Cell. I mean, if I even look at the
only disappointment was the end of the match. Everything leading up to that was fine.
First of all, the red lighting practically burned my eyes. All right, I did not need that entire match to be showcased like that. That was
doesn't take away from the action in the ring, though.
And not to mention the action in the ring. All the action was Seth Rollins trying to take down the Fiend and it not working over and over and over to a cartoonish extent, to the point that they call it no contest in a match that's supposed to have no contest.
Was it
Say
no
what you will about
contest, or was it
Super Showdown, it was for the fans in attendance. Everyone, internet and otherwise, was outraged, chanting AEW at Hell in a Cell. That's how disappointed they were. And if I even look at the rest of the card, it was half the match wasn't even promoted right. There was only 4 matches on the whole damn thing. Everything else got thrown in there, including a tag team women's title changeover. They added that in the
happy we got a tag team. Let's just be happy we got a women's tag team match on the pay-per-view. Because how often did that happen in 2019?
Granted, yes, there was still a new brand on the tag belts, but as far as Super Showdown, you can't even use the women in that case because unfortunately they weren't even allowed to be there at that time.
Yeah,
and
we
yet
did have
we got
Renee
an
Young on
overabundance of
commentary, but
women's
that was
matches,
it.
good and bad, at Hell in a Cell. Here's the thing: as far as Hell in a Cell as a gimmick, you showed how great it could be with Becky and Sasha, and then you showed how bad it could be with Seth and the Fiend.
Exactly. Like, you at least had a great match on your card. You had Becky Lynch versus Sasha.
Don't knock the matches just because they happen to be in Saudi Arabia. Don't knock it just because it was for a different kind of fandom.
None of those matches were great. They were fine at best.
Yes, but it was a consistent show. The Hell in a Cell was all over the place, from Bayley losing to Charlotte for the umpteenth time, which was predictable as all hell. And it was the last time we were actually going to see Hugger Bayley because of the draft later on that week. And that's the thing. A lot of these rivalries, most of them never even got finished because of the brand split and the draft. And it was a mess leading into it.
Well, that's not the first time that's happened.
Time. All right. It was a good 5-minute debate period from both of our players. So we're going to go into the closing arguments. We started with Jacob. We're going to go to Jacob. Jacob, your 60-second closing argument will begin whenever you're ready.
The finish to your main event, while it received the backlash, it still made the Fiend look strong, and I think that's what it accomplished. The gimmick match didn't need to happen. The finish worked, not in the match, but in the match type, but it worked. And you're failing to bring up Lynch versus Banks because that was a great match. It was probably one of the best women's matches of the entire year. Nobody remembers anything from Super Showdown except for Goldberg and Undertaker botching 83 times. It was a terrible card. We did not need Shane versus Reigns. We did not need 26 minutes of Randy Orton versus Triple H. Lars Sullivan versus the Lucha House Party went on 5 minutes, and we didn't even need that. It was, like you said, it was a glorified house show. That's what it felt like, but it wasn't. It was a legit pay-per-view, and it was the worst of 2019.
All right. Ryan, whenever you're ready, your 60 seconds will begin.
The main difference between these two pay-per-views is the fact that you have one that is pretty much just for the fans in Saudi Arabia. So, of course, they're going to go ahead and just give them what they want, whether it be the 50-man Royal Rumble with Mansoor, their leading wrestler, going ahead and winning. And you got all these other matches that are fine because they're the first major showcases for some of these superstars to an audience that has never gotten to see it. That in itself gives the show credit, regardless of any political issues. Hell in a Cell, on the other hand, was a canonical pay-per-view, and it was supposed to lead into the draft, into the end of the year. And we had so many matches that meant nothing. Nat versus Lacey, Randy versus Ali, the Viking Raiders and Braun versus the OC. That was just a lead up to him facing Tyson Fury at Survivor Series. The Shorty G was just a joke bullshit. And even with him winning, he still looked soft at the end of the match when Baron goes ahead and takes him out, which again, worse Baron match than what you got at Super Showdown. Ultimately, this was just a canonical failure, a failure of writing, a failure of setup, and God help us if we had anything afterwards.
All right. Good first question from both of our players. I'm going to be interested to see where our fellow judges go with this. Let's start to the first person on my left. Let's go to Alec Miller. Alec, where do you stand on this?
It was a good debate. I am actually leaning towards Ryan. I think that he was on the offensive more and defended his points, whereas Jacob, he defended pretty well, but I think wasn't able to do enough to get the point.
All right, let's go to our second judge, Jonathan Peck. Jonathan, where do you stand?
Very good argument for the offense and defense of each guy's arguments right here. The thing that really grabbed me right here based on the argument who won, though, I have to give my point to Ryan also, though. He did defend the opponent's choice right here, why his pay-per-view wasn't all that bad. Well, his point for his pay-per-view right here did have the reason why it's sort of the worst right here. There's a failed sub right here. Not only the fail of the Hell in the Cell, but the draft afterwards and his points right here. So I had to give my point to Ryan.
All right. So Ryan gets the first point from the first question. He is up 1-0. So now we go to the second question. We're going to go to the category of feuds. Kind of a similar type of question here. We wanted to ask both of our players, what was wrestling's worst title feud of all time? Now we had to explain a little bit more about what qualified as a world title feud because obviously I didn't really explain it that well, so I apologize to both of them. But this was open to any promotion, any style of what they classified a world title feud. We started with Jacob in the first question, so we're going to go to Ryan in question 2. Ryan, what have you chose for wrestling's worst all-time world title feud?
All right. So as far as feuds go, just to give you a mindset about where I think about things, as far as I'm considered, a feud is something that goes ahead. Sorry, this is just a reminder. A feud is something that goes on for the entirety of someone's career. So you look at feuds like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Ric Flair, Macho Man and Hogan, Rock and Austin. these are feuds that have spanned their entire careers and have always like kind of picked up where they left off in a sense. You know, there's always been an ongoing story or an ongoing reason for these two people to be battling. However, if I look at something like John Cena versus Randy Orton, with the cavalcade of matches that they have had and the significance of the multiple title changes that have gone on between them, there is practically nothing to them other than that. This is what I consider to be filler. This is a rivalry that has practically no stakes against one guy or the other. It's just two good performers and they're performing. They're basically used as like a placeholder for when a real title championship match or a real feud comes into play. It's a way to bounce back the titles and to inflate their own records of having the belts. And ultimately, when you look at as many matches that they had, how many can you actually say you remember? There's like nothing to these two except, oh, you get an RKO, you get attitude adjustment, or an FU as I prefer to have called it. Ultimately, for as much as these two have rivaled on, there's nothing to the rivalry, and it's just bland, dull, and ultimately unnecessary in the grand scheme of things.
All right, so we got Cena and Orton from Ryan's standpoint. Jacob, what do you have to counter?
I decided to go with a feud that happened back in 2010, and it was about, I'd say, 6 years too late. And that was The Undertaker versus Kane for the World Heavyweight Championship. We had a series of 3 matches that were just awful. I don't think they had a good WrestleMania match back in WrestleMania 14, but after that, I don't think as opponents they ever really meshed well. And that was very apparent in this specific feud. And it was all built up by The Undertaker being in a vegetative state and Kane blaming it on Rey Mysterio. Like, we're supposed to believe Rey Mysterio can put The Undertaker in a vegetative state. This rivalry at this specific point got off on the worst foot possible. And we got 3 matches that were just absolute garbage. Like, they weren't good. None of them were good. And so that's my choice.
All right, so we have Kane Undertaker from 2010 versus Cena versus Orton every feud. So it's going to be interesting to see where both of our players are going to stand on this. So
I got the
5
time
minutes.
ready to go.
All right, 5 minutes will begin when the first person begins speaking.
Let me tell you, how many matches do I remember? Well, there was the Randy Orton versus John Cena Iron Man match from, I believe that was Breaking Point. There was an I Quit match. So, I mean, there's at least 2. They had that triple threat.
Are you remembering the matches, or are you simply remembering the gimmicks that was used for them? Because there is a difference.
I'm remembering the matches. The matches were, those 2 matches specifically were brutal. 2009 Randy Orton was probably one of the best characters of, the last 15 years.
Was he a character, or was he just a guy who had a devastating finishing move? That was about
it.
Yes,
he was a character.
2009 Randy Orton was as flat as a board in comparison to Cena. And Cena really, his waning of like whether or not people wanted to chant for him or whether or not they wanted to boo him, that was a crux of like a part of this rivalry, because you had somebody who the fans didn't care about at all, and someone who the fans only cared half about. There was no meat and potatoes on this match. And
was he a no, yes, he was. It all started at the Royal Rumble. That whole stuff with the McMahons and Triple H, that was fantastic. So yes, he was a character. Are you telling me? You're telling me he wasn't a character
with the McMahons and no, the stuff with him and Triple H, that's a rivalry. Orton and Triple H and the McMahons, that's a rivalry, because that was like deep rooted and deep seated. That was blood in the sand.
The same character. 2009,
no,
it was not the same
character. The man he started feuding with Cena, he became just milk and toast bad guy. It was nothing. The thing is, you could stress from SummerSlam 2009, Breaking Point, Hell in a Cell, down to the I Quit match, bragging rights, all of it. It was just one match after another, back and forth with the titles. It might as well have been just flip a coin, let's see who wins this time. At least you can say, with Undertaker and Kane, I'm going to be right honest with you, I loved that rivalry. I loved Kane really stepping up to the plate as his own person, trying to usurp Undertaker as the devil's favorite demon. I liked that version of Kane because it was finally him stepping out of the shadow of a decades-long story of him and his brother. And yeah, I thought it was kind of funny that they go ahead and try to blame it on the giant killer, Rey Mysterio. That was cute. It might have been silly.
Wrestling is not
it might have
supposed
been
to be
silly
cute.
writing, but it was memorable. That's what made a good rivalry for it. It was memorable. You can look back on it, and whether you like the matches or not, it's stuck in there. Whereas Randy and Cena just like washes over because they're all basically the same stuff.
None of those matches were the same. None of those matches were the same. No, with Undertaker and Kane. Yes, they had 3 different types of matches, but you had to get the Nexus involved.
Which was good for the Nexus that they had something to do.
Right, because that worked out for them. Look where they are now.
Blame that on Cena. You can't blame it on Taker and Kane.
But with Randy Orton and John Cena, Randy Orton and John Cena, I feel, are 2 of the more, not severely underrated, but I don't think they get enough credit for their mic work. So when they're
may not get enough credit for his mic work. Randy Orton's just like, that's all I hear when I hear of him. He drones on and
for his character at the time
ridiculous stuff that any heel would say. All right, and as far as like, I'm not saying anything against them. They're great competitors. They're great wrestlers, but together they don't spark anything. 2 of the matches from like 2009 to 2014 that they had to end with the use of handcuffs. Handcuffs! Come on! Is this really how we want titles to be changed hand in hand over ridiculous circumstances? The fact that whole rivalry was basically interjected into the whole Daniel Bryan thing of 2014 leading up to WrestleMania, I'm glad they decided to focus on Daniel, because if they considered to focus on that, WrestleMania would have been terrible.
Do we really need Kane to use 5 guys to bury The Undertaker alive to retain his championship? No.
Yes,
absolutely.
It was silly.
It's wrestling.
It was funny for a heel to go and heel means with that much emphasis. He had to do that much to bury his brother, who is the Phenom. Yeah, in the context of storytelling, it makes all the sense in the world that Kane has to go to extreme reasons and ways to.
And it makes all the sense in the world for someone as sadistic as Randy Orton to use handcuffs. It makes sense for the character.
3 matches. Whereas we're talking 2 matches in the span of years. All right. At least you can say that this little rivalry for the 3 pay-per-views ended as quickly as it started. We've had to deal with Cena and Orton for much longer.
Time.
All right. That was a very good debate from both of our players. So we're going to go to the closing arguments. We started with Ryan. We're going to go to Ryan for the closing argument. Your 60 seconds will begin whenever you're ready.
The thing that makes Kane Taker 2010 so interesting, at least to me, is the fact that you have all this storied history from their long-standing rivalry, from the first time Kane went into that cell and messed up Taker. You've had everything kind of coming to a head in 2010, with Kane finally having the title and being on the top of the mountain over his brother. Regardless of whatever means he may get to keep that belt and whatever acting he has to do to play off that he was looking for the guy who knocked Taker out, it was still enjoyable and memorable at the time. And I can still look back on it and laugh at the silliness that they used in order to incorporate this long-standing narrative into just these 3 pay-per-views. I can't say the same about Orton and Cena. There have just been so many matches and so many title changes that there is nothing to their rivalry except let's put one good guy in front of another good guy or bad guy and see what happens. It's nothing.
Time.
All right. Jacob, whenever you're ready, your 60 seconds will begin.
John Cena and Randy Orton are 2 of the more above average in-ring performers, and they showed that every time they were in the ring together. And in 2009 specifically, we had a character in Randy Orton who was sadistic and would go to any means necessary. And that, I think, works with John Cena well, the never give up. The two played off each other really well. With Undertaker and Kane in 2010, like I said, it was 6 years too late. Had this been in 2004, after the WrestleMania match and this continued, I think the rivalry would have been better. Undertaker has never been decent at promos. He's always been mediocre at best. Kane has always been mediocre at best. But you can do that all you want, but it's true. They needed to bring Paul Bearer in just so they could have somebody decent at promos. So nothing got me invested, especially when it started with Rey Mysterio being blamed. No one's going to believe that. You want to talk about silly? This rivalry shouldn't have been silly.
Time.
All right.
That Taker beat hurt my heart. My God.
He's been mediocre his entire career. It's not his fault.
Do you not see the shirt?
It's the character. It's not his fault.
All right. So after those jabs right to the heart of both of our players, we now have to go to a judge's decision here. We're going to start with Jonathan on this one. Jonathan, where do you stand?
All right. First off, before I put my point, what did you just say about that, Jacob? Okay. Forget it. All right. Good arguments between both of you. The thing for me, I think I'm a little torn between both of your picks because both of you have put good valid points right here. For me, I think my point should slightly go to Ryan on this one because he did point out right here that his match right here, it just felt like was not connecting between the two competitors facing each other. While yourself, it might be sort of 6 years too late though. At least some people were very interested in the rivalry just came on a little going right here. So I will give my point to Ryan.
All right, I'll go next on this. I'm actually leaning a little bit towards the other side. I'm actually going to give my point to Jacob. Simply because I was curious to see how Ryan was going to play the fact that he wanted to use the entire Cena Orton feud in general, which means there's a lot more matches that Jacob could use to pinpoint. Hey, this was actually a really good match. This had a good creative finish. This was a good match too, and I think Jacob did do a good job playing that up. He also did bring up whether. I'm not going to bring up the promos because that's subjective, but he did bring up the fact that Paul Bearer was kind of brought in for kind of no reason, which I also kind of felt was kind of weird at the time as well. It felt like they needed to find weird ways to get Kane over as a heel champion, which I didn't think was really necessary, especially with the way that Kane, especially when Taker returned, and then Kane immediately took him down when Taker returned at I think it was. Is that SummerSlam? I can't even remember what that was. Yeah. But it was instantly get Kane over as a threat to take down the Undertaker when he comes back, and then needed to use kind of cheap tactics to kind of get the win. I felt that kind of downgraded Kane's run, and I like the fact that Jacob did point out that he didn't need to use those kind of heel tactics to get over that, and he did kind of bump up Cena and Orton, the feud in general as a whole. So I'm going to give my side to Jacob, which means Alan, you will be the determining factor of who gets the point here. Where do you side?
Oh yeah, all right. This is a tough one. Both guys had like really good. They really fought each other and defended their own pick. I think I am leaning more towards Ryan. He mentioned more like things that were wrong with the feud. I think he had more obviously to pull from with the amount of matches that there were. Actually, and said some really good things about Jacob's feud that he picked. So I'm actually went with Ryan on this one.
All right. So sorry, Jacob, did what I could, but I was unfortunately outvoted on that. So Ryan goes up 2-0.
Cena versus Orton would have been my second choice, actually.
I didn't even touch on the 27 stuff. God.
Yeah, I was curious as to what Ryan was going to do when he picked that. I was like, I wonder what feud he's going to, or which particular feud he's going to pick. And I was like, wait, he just said everything. He just said the whole feud in general. I was like, it's going to be interesting to to debate, but it obviously worked. So now we're in a situation where if Ryan gets another point before any speed round is necessary, Ryan will win the match. Now we're going to go into the next category, which is WrestleMania. WrestleMania is right around the corner. It looks like we've got a WrestleMania main event stamped, potentially Brock Lesnar versus Drew McIntyre, something I'm actually really looking forward to. I've wanted to see that for quite a long time. So we wanted to ask both of our players, what is the best WrestleMania main event in WrestleMania's history? So we're going to go back to Jacob on this one. Jacob, what have you chosen for the best WrestleMania main event?
WrestleMania has featured quite a few great main events. It's featured some stinkers, but it's featured a lot of great matches. And so I picked the main event from 2004, and that was Shawn Michaels versus Triple H versus Chris Benoit. Two of arguably the greatest in-ring performers of all time, and Triple H, who is above average. I think we can all agree on that. He's above average, but in the ring, let's not talk about the politics. And it featured a result that I think at the time, which was before the internet and everything, which was kind of shocking to me. And that was Chris Benoit beating Shawn Michaels and Triple H, who had this great feud leading up to this point. And then, the moment after Chris Benoit and Eddie embracing in the ring, I don't think that's ever going to be forgotten. And yes, I know I'm talking Chris Benoit. I'm talking about Chris Benoit, the wrestler. Let's keep it at that.
Fair enough. So now let's go to Ryan. Ryan, what have you chosen for WrestleMania's best main event?
All right. So first off, I want to mention, yes, to respect to Jacob, just talking about Chris Benoit, the wrestler, in this whole thing. We'll do that. That's not a problem. I will say, though, the match itself that he mentioned, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Chris Benoit, it was a fine match, but it was fine-tuned and executed much, much better when it was Batista, Randy Orton, and Daniel Bryan for both World Championship belts at WrestleMania. And I say that simply because you can really parallel the two of them, but the story alone of Daniel Bryan's accomplishment from being thrown down the hierarchy of the WWE pantheon of wrestlers, being told he's just a B-plus player, he will never be champion, he will never do anything prominent. All of that rivalry of 2014 leading into the road to WrestleMania and the movement, the yes movement, like this, going up and down as fans clamored for Daniel to win that match. And not just win that match, 2 matches in the same night with 3 of the biggest names in sports entertainment finally grabbing not just the silver and the gold, standing atop high at the end of WrestleMania. That in itself is what makes a great championship match, a great main event, and a great ending to what is one of the best WrestleManias of all time.
I am shocked that no one picked Hulk Hogan versus King Kong Bundy at WrestleMania 2.
Second choice.
Second choice. Oh,
second choice.
I have another one of mine, but
I can smell the sarcasm through my laptop.
I have another one in mind, but I'm not going to say it until the round's over, Butch.
All right, so we got 2 triple threat matches. This is going to be interesting to see how they go with this. So the 5-minute debate period will begin when the first person begins.
Got the timer ready?
Great choice. Great choice. However, we've seen that before. Years earlier in Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Chris Benoit. It wasn't the same underdog story as Daniel Bryan, but it was unexpected. Chris Benoit was a SmackDown guy coming to Raw. That part was unexpected, and then the in-ring action itself was it was until recently it has been called the greatest WrestleMania main event. Not just main event, but one of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. We've had other great matches that haven't been the main event. When Triple H was out of the ring, Shawn Michaels and Chris Benoit were killing it. When Shawn Michaels and Triple H were in the ring, the action was still really solid. I can't exactly say the same for Randy Orton and Batista. I don't think those two have ever really gelled well as opponents. Randy Orton and when Daniel Bryan was involved, the match was really good. But with it, when they were trying to double team Daniel Bryan, and I know it works for the story, but it doesn't make the action great.
Okay, all things to your match, it was a fine match. Both of these are fine matches. However, yours was basically just Triple H and Shawn Michaels with Chris Benoit peppered in. All right, it was a two-sided match with like a little bit of a dark horse leaning into it of Chris Benoit. It was his first time being able to main event. It was his first title win, his only title win. And unfortunately, it was one of those things that was probably more highlighted by the celebration with Eddie Guerrero at the end rather than the match itself.
You could say the same about your match.
No, you cannot, because
yes,
the lead up to that whole triple threat is what made the match great. The storytelling of this whole Daniel Bryan yes movement authority sort of clashing. Everything leading up to that point of the match, when he finally got into the match, it could have easily have just been a Triple H pinning him, and then it would have just been Batista and Randy Orton. And regardless of how people may have wanted to see it, people still would have leaned towards Batista in that sense because he was basically the name mark guy. Yes, people looked down on him because of him taking over the Royal Rumble as opposed to Daniel Bryan, but certainly there were enough people that were probably just as between yes and no with him as they were with John Cena. So it is obviously a better competitor than, say, to be thrown into that mix where Randy Orton was the clear heel and Bryan was the clear face. And you could say Bryan versus Orton was great. Bryan versus Batista was great. And yes, Batista had a good amount of offense against Randy Orton for being someone who hadn't even been in the ring for that long because he had been out doing movies. All right, you had a nice gelling of both the black, the white, and the gray in that match. Whereas with your match, it was pretty much just black and white, and maybe the gray got in there. And certainly as far as like the fanfare of the match, it was more of the fact that it was pretty much the two big names of Triple H and Shawn Michaels going at it. Whereas here, it was all about Bryan. It was a feel-good match. It was a great match that we needed severely after having seen an Undertaker lose for the first time at WrestleMania. It was the best feel-good moment you could have possibly gotten at the end of any pay-per-view.
Which you knew was coming, so that, you knew it was coming. It was just a matter of when. With my
In
match,
the land of the McMahons, nothing is certain. All right, they could have easily screwed him over and tried to drag out the storyline, possibly to SummerSlam, for all we know, and they would have put it on Orton.
They've been dragging it out since SummerSlam. They weren't. No, I don't think they were going to continue that.
It was a year-long investment. I mean, people were so invested in this. I'm surprised the Yes Movement didn't go into the ring with Daniel at the end. I would have loved to have seen that. And the fact that it's a boyhood dream coming true.
Spot anyway. Like, it wouldn't have happened if CM Punk didn't walk out. Like, this was the second plan.
This has nothing to do with CM Punk, and Lord knows we could have gone on ages about whether or not CM Punk was still involved. But regardless of whether or not CM Punk was there, the viewpoint of the McMahons towards Daniel Bryan, whether kayfabe or not, has always lasted, and probably still does to this day. Whereas with Benoit, I mean, the people knew he was a competent wrestler. He was a great technical wrestler. They knew how good they had it with him. It was just a matter of putting him up with the A-class wrestlers of Michaels and Triple H, which at this point were pretty much established legends. It was almost a passing of the torch for Benoit, but that's all it was. All right, his championship faded just as quickly as he won it. All right, that match in itself.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about the match itself.
Right, and the match
in-ring action from bell to bell was fantastic and has been talked about as one of the best of all time.
All right. Good back and forth from both of our players. Obviously, this is a very critical closing argument. We're going to start with Jacob. Obviously, if you feel you need to use your minute extension, you can. Otherwise, your time will begin whenever you're ready. What's that?
I'll use mine for mine.
Okay. You just say it when it's your turn. So, Jacob, if you want to use yours, you can.
How many minutes? All right.
Daniel Bryan versus Batista versus Orton was a good match. But like I said before, when you had Batista and Orton in the ring, it almost got boring. And the double team stuff almost went on a little too long. With my match, when you had Shawn Michaels and Chris Benoit in the ring together, they are two of the best in-ring performers of all time, and they showed it, and they showed it extremely well. And add on to the fact that Triple H tapped out. And this was the first time at WrestleMania, probably the first time in a major pay-per-view match that he was willing to do that. I could be wrong, I don't know. But it was one of the few at that time at least. And so for Chris Benoit to have that, and then to have that moment afterwards with Eddie Guerrero, it was a beautiful moment. It was a beautiful match. And it is the greatest WrestleMania main event of all time.
All right. Ryan has already said that he will use his minute extension. So, Ryan, your 2 minutes will begin whenever you're ready.
I don't feel it's shooting myself in the foot to say, yes, Jacob, you are correct. It was a fine match. And I stated that at the beginning of this particular question. My point is more so the fact that whatever Michaels, Triple H, Benoit was, Daniel Bryan, Orton, and Batista lifted up and improved upon. All right, you talk about the technical wrestling. Daniel Bryan could make a piece of shit look incredible in the ring. That's just a credit to Daniel Bryan's prowess. Randy Orton does what Randy Orton always does, and for as boring as some people may say he is reliable and he is a consistent part of any match. All right, you can always go to him when necessary. Not to mention the RKO is what it is. It is the most devastating move possibly in the modern era. And Batista, for somebody who was not in the ring for as long as either of these men leading up to that particular match, he shined brighter than people probably expected. All right, he did his job for being not just a celebrity part of the match, but also for being a competitive third gear in the whole fixture. And like I said, the story of Daniel Bryan ascending to the top speaks volumes in this match. Not only did he have to work almost an entire year to get his point into being in the main event, not only did he have to wrestle Triple H prior that night, but to see him blood, sweat, and tears all the way through to the very end, and seeing him on top of that ring post with both belts glazed upon his shoulders speaks to the underdog story like no other story has said before. And like I mentioned earlier in that WrestleMania, we had probably one of the most dour notes possible. We needed the big fat win that you got.
Fine.
All right. That was good from both of our players. Now it's time to see where our judges stand. We're going to start with Alec on this one. Where do you stand?
Another tough one here, but I'm leaning towards Jacob on this one. He mentioned the greatness that these all three of these guys can do in the ring, and then on top of that, kind of dug into Ryan's with the fact that this kind of set the blueprint for what that could have been, what Daniel Bryan and Randy Orton and Batista were. So I give my point to Jacob.
All right, I'll go next on this one. I'm inclined to agree. I was actually leaning towards Jacob as well. The one thing I was a little surprised about, both of our players talked about how good their matches were, but never really heard anything about any of the matches that made them good. We just heard about the story, stuff that led up to it. Both of these matches had incredible table spots. Neither was brought up. That kind of surprised me. The one thing that at least Jacob did bring up is the fact was the ending, the fact that Triple H did tap out. I can't recall if Ryan brought that up in his or not, but I think the fact that Jacob brought up the fact that how, not just who won, but how the match ended, the fact that Triple H tapped out, something we very rarely saw, much less at WrestleMania, to me was the the big positive to Jacob on this one. So I'm giving my point to Jacob. So that gives means he survives. It doesn't
Not
matter.
a sweep.
What's that?
I said it's not a sweep.
Oh, so Jonathan, it wouldn't have mattered, but where would you have stood on this one?
I'm actually would give my point to Jacob also, though. He did put up all of his points right here, though. And pretty much the same thoughts of both of you guys right here, though. So I would have given my point to Jacob also.
All right. So that means Jacob
Your
lives to
authority
fight.
figures.
What?
I said you authority figures.
It hurts to tear down Daniel Bryan, though. He's my favorite. He's my guy right now.
All right. But now we get to question 4. And I know that one of our players was kind of fearing that this question was coming up, but I won't say which one it is. I think he just alluded to it, though. But we're going to go to the category of ECW. And ECW is known for a lot of things. It's known for a lot of great moments, great wrestlers, and all that great stuff. But we wanted to find out what wrestler personified what ECW stood for. And I think you can really go many different ways with this, but it comes down to what our two players think. So we're going to go to Ryan on this one. Ryan, what was your pick of the wrestler that best personified what ECW stood for?
All right. Well, not to age myself too much, but Lord knows I have watched enough ECW in my day. And really, I think in order to even partake in ECW, you have to have a certain mindset, a certain physicality, and a certain, shall we say, bloodlust. And I would say everyone had that to some degree. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there in the first place. But if we're talking about someone that exemplifies extreme championship wrestling, it's none other than the heart and soul of ECW, Tommy Dreamer. Whether it's his rivalries, his work behind the scenes, being a figurehead of the brand, and literally being possibly just a regular guy, and as some people would have touted him, doing the incredible things that he has done, there is no better figurehead for the brand than Tommy Dreamer. And I don't want to necessarily say too much more on that at the moment, so we'll just go over to Jacob.
All right. Jacob, Ryan's giving you the go-ahead. What is your choice for the wrestler that best personifies ECW?
Well, I want to start this off by saying, unfortunately, I did not watch a lot of ECW growing up. And even in my later years, I did not watch a lot of ECW. But the one guy I always heard about was Sabu. When I think of the word extreme, and then I go back and I watch some ECW, the guy I think is the most extreme was Sabu. I think he was willing to put his body on the line in extreme spots. And, you know, as someone who doesn't watch ECW, it wasn't a hardcore fan, who would probably say is a casual fan, Sabu was the guy I wanted to watch because he was willing to do that. So I'm going with Sabu.
Great choices by both of them. I loved this question personally because there were so many that you could choose from.
I hated this question.
RVD, Shane Douglas, Taz, Terry Funk. The list goes on and on and on. But it comes down to the two picks that both of our players have made. So the 5 minutes will begin when the first person begins speaking.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say this. April 1995. Sabu was supposed to show up for an ECW event. He decided not to show up and instead went over to New Japan Pro Wrestling. At that particular event, Paul Heyman instinctively says, "Sabu, you're fired." Sabu's loyalty to ECW waxes and wanes as much as anybody's could. And while, yes, he may be an extreme wrestler, he is not the guy to put in front of on a poster for ECW. There are much better people, much more loyal people, much better champions, and much more people that have bled for that company, for that brand, in order to make it worth chanting, even to this day. Tommy Dreamer is one such guy. All right, he has bled for it. He has been a locker room leader. He has taken his own promotional brand, the House of Hardcore, which was basically the training facility for the ECW alum in that right. He is ECW through and through. And he is definitely somebody that I would go ahead and says exemplifies everything that ECW offers, not just the extreme part. I'll give you a moment.
That's all true, but when I think of ECW, I'm focused on that E, and I think most casual fans were. And to me, that was Sabu. Looking back at old highlights, old matches, I was always in awe of the spots that Sabu was willing to do. I can't say the same for Tommy Dreamer, personally. It's personal. I think that's true for most
That's how it
wrestling.
should be in something like this. Absolutely.
So for I think most casual fans, we're going towards Sabu because of that. Like, if we want to see something extreme, I don't think Sabu is going to disappoint. I think Tommy Dreamer was good in like the storytelling aspect, but when I wanted to just see some spots, Sabu's my guy.
I would say Tommy Dreamer had just as many spots, whether it was with Singapore canes, chairs. He went through his fair share of tables. It's just the fact that Sabu pretty much leaned on him more as a gimmick as opposed to Tommy Dreamer, who incorporated it into everything he did. And even then, with Sabu, I'd say a good amount of his better matches you could attribute to him working with someone like Rob Van Dam, whereas Tommy Dreamer could work with somebody with just like Sandman with his drunken ass and still be able to pull off a banger match and a banger feud. Not to mention, I'd say probably one of the most notable feuds was Tommy Dreamer versus Raven. They worked together as tag matches. They fought each other. Bueller got involved. It was one of those things where it's like when you heard Tommy Dreamer versus Raven, you knew there was bad blood in the water. You knew there was going to be something visceral. Whereas with Sabu, okay, yeah, he's going to go through a table. Practically everybody through ECW went through tables at some point. So
It's
to
the way
call
he
him the
went
extreme
through 'em,
part is like
personally.
negligible in that sense. And not to mention, if you're going to go ahead and you're going to promote ECW as a brand, as a whole, you want someone that incorporates everything, that gives you the good, the bad, and the ugly. For me, Sabu only gave me the ugly. You know, Tommy Dreamer was
I
somebody
think that's what ECW was. It was ugly. It was
ECW
at
was
that
not
point.
ugly. It was certainly different. And Sabu, again,
And that's what
not
it
even going
wanted
to
to
the
be.
April thing. He's the one that defected to WWE and joined Rob Van Dam with Jerry Lawler to face ECW back when that feud was starting in the 90s. So Sabu, as far as being a person that you would say exemplifies ECW, is pretty much, again, a flip of a coin. On any given day, he could just be fuck ECW and go off and do his own thing.
1 minute.
That's not somebody I want promoting my brand. I don't know. That's not someone I want to go ahead and be a figurehead for it.
ECW, I think, wanted to be different. You had WWE, WWF at the time, and WCW, where you could get the wrestling. When I watch ECW back in my later years, I wanted to see the extreme. Because I could go to WWE and I could go to WCW for wrestling. So when I wanted
Until
to see the
WWE bought them,
extreme, when I wanted to see extreme, I gravitated towards Sabu. I didn't gravitate towards Tommy Dreamer. Although
and that's your
Tommy
personal
Dreamer,
choice. But the thing is,
and that
Sabu,
is, yes.
as extreme, as homicidal, genocidal, suicidal as he was, it was a gimmick, just like many of them had a gimmick for being extreme. All right, even Tommy Dreamer was known as the innovator of violence. But the thing is, he was a common man doing everything.
All right, we're going to go to the closing arguments. We started with Ryan. We're going to go to Ryan here. Ryan, whenever you're ready, your 60 seconds will begin.
ECW was a unique brand. No one can doubt that. And people like Sabu or RVD or Sandman, you know, these were all great characters that played into the idea of Extreme Championship Wrestling. Even Sandman to an extent back when it was Eastern Championship Wrestling. But the thing is, a lot of the stuff that made them who they were was more the gimmick rather than the violence, because everyone had the violence back then. That was a part of being in ECW. You had to be able to get down and dirty. Even New Jack was ECW alum in that point. But Tommy Dreamer was the guy that you went to whenever you needed someone on the front line, someone touting the brand, someone going ahead and being an ECW original. He was the guy that exemplified everything soup to nuts of what it stood for. Not just the extreme, but all three letters, all three mentalities that come with being a professional wrestler in that brand. He is your go-to guy every time.
Time. Right on the clock.
All right. Jacob, you still have your minute extension. You didn't use it before, so if you want to use it.
Nah, I'm good.
All right. So your 60 seconds will begin whenever you're ready.
Like I've been saying, when I think of ECW, I think the most important part of that is because when they wanted to be different, it was extreme. And I think any casual fan is going to go to Sabu because he was willing to put his body on the line in crazy spots. Even in the later years in the WWE ECW, he was the guy they picked to face Rey Mysterio for the World Heavyweight Championship, I believe, in 2006. And he showcased that he could wrestle decently, I think. So he had that part, but he was about the extreme, I think. And that's what gravitated me towards ECW when I was itching to see something, violent and crazy. He was the first guy to come to mind. And so that's why I picked Sabu.
All right. So now comes down to the judge's call. We're going to start with Jonathan on this one. Jonathan, where are you leaning towards?
I like the two compelling arguments right here, and they're good back and forth between why during that time the ECW were very much elevated what they are. The choice I'm willing to pick slightly was I'm going to pick with Jacob on this one because at least his closing for me it just really sort of solidified why ECW to begin with, and also he explained why his pick sort of responsible when make ECW what it is, and is a back and forth with Ryan. So I'm going to put my point to Jacob.
All right. I'll go next on this one. I'm kind of leaning the other way. I was actually going to go with Ryan simply because I like the fact that Ryan did bring up the fact that it wasn't just about the storytelling and the moments and all that stuff. Whereas Sabu was, as he kind of alluded to, kind of a one-trick pony. It was kind of just more of the hardcore and the tables, which he said everybody did at some point, which didn't really make him stand out as much as others. And again, the storytelling, the behind the scenes, as he brought up, to me was a firm definition of what personified what ECW was, because they were, as many people thought, the little train that could and needed help. And someone like Tommy Dreamer, as Ryan did allude to, someone that was so dedicated and loyal to the company, to me was a big selling point to him. So I'm going with Ryan. So Alec, it comes down to you. Where are you standing on here?
Jacob put up a good fight, but I'm also going with Ryan on this one. I think he had the better reasons for why Tommy Dreamer embodied ECW. Even knocking down Sabu with the whole him not really being kind of flip floppy with ECW really hurt the argument. So I'm going with Ryan.
All right, and with that being said, the winner of this match by a score of 3-1, although much closer than I think the score is going to dictate, is Ryan. So Ryan, congratulations! You are now undefeated. You can start your Goldberg-esque streak here in the Chokeslam.
ACW. Sorry, had to do it.
Because when I think Goldberg, I think ECW. But fair enough.
I would have loved to have seen that, honestly. I would love to see Goldberg in an Extreme Rules match. One day, if he needs to check bad enough.
All right, so We're gonna go to some closing interviews here. Let's go to our winner here today, Ryan. Ryan, you definitely brought the knowledge. You brought the game. Definitely seems like you knew how to play the debates and the arguments really well. Ultimately, though, it comes down to what you thought. How would you personally assess how you played today?
It was fun, to be quite honest. I mean, I've already done enough with movie battlegrounds to say, okay, I kind of got an idea about it, and it was nice to get away from something so controversial and phony and such. So let's talk about professional wrestling. Yes. To that end, it was really nice to go ahead and take something that I normally do with friends, just watching pay-per-views, and actually parlay it into this kind of field. I loved arguing with Jacob. I mean, Jacob feels like the kind of guy that I would normally be arguing with, so I felt very comfortable, very friendly in that regard, no animosity, and again, the choices that Jacob had are perfectly fine choices for any wrestling fan. And for it just to come down to like the numbers like it did, I don't fault Jacob in any way, sense, or form. As far as it both being our first match, I would gladly debate with Jacob anytime. It's fun in that sense, especially when you're talking about something so ridiculous and yet so enjoyable.
Well said. Now let's go to our unfortunate second place finisher here today, and that is Jacob. Jacob, no reason to hold your head down. I think you played really damn well for a debut, especially considering I was very well aware of Ryan's knowledge of wrestling, so I definitely commend you for the effort that you put in. But how did you assess how you played today?
I think I did okay. I was definitely not as well prepared as I wanted just because of personal life stuff going on this week, but I'm not going to use that as an excuse. I'm going to use that as a learning point for hopefully maybe future debates. And this was actually my very first debate, like ever. I've never actually done anything like this, so it was really fun, just to talk wrestling and the ridiculousness of it all. And for me to lose by 1 point on an ECW question, I'm happy with that.
All right, you kind of hinted at potentially returning. Would you be interested in coming back?
Absolutely, if you will have me.
Well said. Or as Damian Sanda would say, indubitably. So yeah. So yeah, with that said, we're going to close up shop here today. This has been another edition of the Chokeslam Wrestling Debate. Time for some plugs. Let's go to Ryan. Ryan, anything that you want to plug here today?
Well, primarily you can always find me on Twitter and Instagram at Real or Deal, all one word, pretty much described as here. Sorry, my camera angling is all bad. You can find me on both. Of course, definitely with Instagram, I'm doing my video a day where I am doing a video a day on Instagram for the entirety of 2020, and half of those are usually going to be the Real or Deal, which is what I use as my movie review platform. So go ahead, check that out. Plus, you can also find Real or Deal Entertainment at Facebook. And there's also JT and Big O, which is a podcast I do with my friend JT McGuire. We do that on Facebook every Sunday, usually around noon, where we talk movies, wrestling, and anything else that happens to come up in the week. So go ahead, give that a tune in whenever you get a chance.
All right, well said. Let's go to Jacob now. Jacob, anything that you want to plug?
I could always use more friends, so look me up on Facebook.
Friend? What's that? Okay.
That's all I got.
He did the JTH philosophy. I need friends, someone like me. So I can definitely account for that kind of speech. That's well said. That's a 10 out of 10 promo right there. So let's go to our judges. Anything that either of our following judges want to promote or plug?
Check out the Arm Bars and Suplexes podcast on Tuesday nights. I post a link here on Facebook, on my Facebook and my Twitter. Alec Miller 0423. We talk wrestling, we talk MMA, so it's always a great time. I'm the wrestling expert. My co-host is the UFC expert, so we get into some really heated debates. So check it out.
And you can see him very soon. He's actually going to be stepping into the ring shortly. We've got his opponent already chosen, so
yes,
look forward to that.
I'm coming after you, Hunter. I'm coming after you, even though I love Hunter.
Well, you spoiled the match. I guess I don't have to worry about holding it in. So yeah, look forward to seeing that match on a later date. But what about our other judge? Anything that he want to promote?
Yeah, you can find me around on Facebook too. I also need some more friends right here though, and also I'm one of the admins of PMG. I'm in the Sports Admin League right here, and by the time maybe post it on YouTube right here, go watch the part 1 of Debate Kingdom for the Sports Brawl Championship match between Jacob West and Sean Webster Crew. I have the pleasure and honor of judging this match. It's really fantastic. If you haven't checked it out, go give it a watch right here. So you can find me on different types of social media at JPit1098 around Twitter, on Instagram, and Facebook. Just find the name Jonathan Peck right here. So, and I hope sometime soon I would, and throughout the league, I hope be competing soon. I'll be doing more than judging or admitting.
All right, well said. And I was also going to say I need friends, so apparently we just need to make that the slogan here at Chokeslam. Chokeslam Wrestling Debate. We all need friends. So I guess I'm gonna
Put that on a t-shirt.
I got kids. I need friends.
Oh boy. So yeah, I'm going to surpass the whole I need friends thing because it's not going to matter anyway. So you can follow me on Twitter at WWEJTH1, and you can follow all my reactions on my channel JTH. So on behalf of everybody here, all the judges, the 2 players, this is JTH. Thank you for watching this edition of the Chokeslam Wrestling Debate, and we will see you next time. So until then, we all bid you adieu.